It's very easy to find photographic evidence and paintings of art schools and ateliers from the 18th and 19th century. The Chase School of Art was founded in 1896 by William Merritt Chase, circled here giving critiques to students, 2 years later being renamed the New York School of Art. Looking at this image, it is clear that no site size or any gridding technique was used. In fact, easels didn't even seem compulsory, as can be seen by this student using a chair to prop up his drawing board. Comparative measurement would have been the only way students could accurately recreate the figure, although it can be seen that the model is situated on a stand, raised to the eye level of the student. This would allow the student to see the whole figure without having to move their head up and down, and also would mean students further back could see the whole figure. This picture of a life drawing class taught by Louis Cass-Lutz at the Cincinnati School of Art during the late 1890s shows a particular setup that would be almost impossible to recreate using any other method apart from comparative measurement. If you were to try and create a site-size drawing or painting, then an entire platform would have to be made for the artist to work on in order to get the correct viewing angle. And clearly using a viewing grid or gridding system would be impossible due to the size of the subject. Also, almost all the easels are placed at an angle from the model, making any kind of accurate site-size measurements again impossible. Here is another photo from the Cincinnati School of Art and shows a more conventional model setup, but still site size would not have been used, as can be seen by the position of the students and their easels. But the model is again placed on a stand so the students can draw the figure without having to look up and down, and so avoiding perspective problems. This is a picture from the Art Institute of Chicago during the early 1900s and shows students working on a 3-hour sketch, all working from drawing boards propped up or simply held in front of them. A similar drawing environment can be seen here in the cast hall of the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, with the photograph showing the students' drawing setup. Arguably the most famous school in the United States of America during the 19th century is the Art Student League of New York, founded in 1875, with teachers and students including George Bridgman, William Merritt Chase, Frank Duveneck, Norman Rockwell, and Winslow Homer, to name a few. Here are a few photographs of Frank Vincent Dumont's classes from the late 19th and early 20th century, and shows a similar setup to other American schools at the time, with many students using chairs as drawing board supports. As you can see, throughout the 19th and right up to the mid-20th century, easels weren't seen as essential equipment, so the emphasis must have been placed on reliable and, most importantly, adaptable drawing techniques, which neither gridding nor site size can provide. It is true that different schools and countries approached drawing differently, but here is a photograph taken from the Brighton School of Art in the UK during the mid-20th century, and again shows students using chairs to prop up drawing boards, meaning gridding nor site size could have been used accurately, and comparative measurement being the only conceivable way an accurate drawing could have been developed. As well as photographic evidence of art schools from the late 19th and early 20th century in Europe, we also have paintings documenting earlier art schools, like this painting by Michael Swerts, a 17th century Flemish painter, showing a typical art class of this time. And like later schools, easels were seemingly not used, or at least not regularly, but the model is posing on a stand, so the student wouldn't have to contend with perspective issues of having to look up and down at the subject. Another painting of an art school, this time by the Danish painter Wilhelm Benz, of a life class at the Danish Royal Academy from the early 19th century, shows a much more elaborate setup than the painting by Swerts, but still most students would prop their drawing boards on their knee, although again the model is posing raised to the eye level of the student. This photograph of the Academie Julian is typical of the art schools, academies and ateliers of Paris during the 19th century, and shows how students, often up to 40 around one model, would work almost on top of each other. many studying directly at the foot of the model, and only a few with an easel, which even then would not allow the student to use a plumb line as there simply wasn't room, let alone retreat back far enough to use sight size. In this photo of Leon Bonnat's class or atelier at the Academie Julian, it can be seen that easels are placed any way they would fit in, which would not work with the sight size technique, as the subject and the drawing or painting has to be parallel to each other. But it can be seen again that the model is placed on a stand raised high up, meaning the student can see the whole figure. Another Parisian art school was the Academie Colarossi, founded in 1870, and it followed a similar approach to that of the Academie Julian in its teachings and studio setup. While perhaps easels were more commonly used, the position of the easels and students wouldn't allow them to use sight size or any measuring device. This student on the far left is so close to another that if she were to stand back, she could quite easily knock over the other's easel. We can see a student taking a measurement though using her charcoal, presumably a form of comparative measurement, as this would really be the only practical drawing technique in this environment. Looking at this postcard of what is presumably the life drawing room at the Academie Colarossi, the students were expected to simply hold or prop up their drawing boards on the banister. This etching by Polly Nip Hill shows this exact same space as the photograph, showing a typical life drawing session with the students propping up their drawing boards. As with the majority of schools and academies, though, the models are placed on a stand to allow for eye-level viewing. Even the prestigious École des Beaux-Arts, France's premier drawing school for the fine arts, used a similar approach to that of other schools, where students are forced to adapt to the model's pose. And as you can see, students are crammed into small spaces, without the necessary space to use sight size, let alone even dropping a plumb line in front of you. Some schools didn't even use easels, and as you can see, used chairs instead. So it is clear that sight size was not used in these schools. So the question is, what was used during this time? And there are numerous records of the techniques and methods used, and almost all of them, while differing somewhat, show a form of comparative measurement to be the favoured method of teaching. In fact, William Rothenstein, a 19th century painter who studied at the Academie Julian, explicitly says sight size was not used. Divide the figure into 4 parts, measuring with charcoal held at arm's length and using a plumb line to get the figure standing well on its feet. No one attempted to draw sight size, but the figure would usually fit this sheet of paper. Comparative measuring differs from sight size in that it is based upon scale rather than direct observation, meaning we are trying to find the relative size of a subject matter, firstly by using the eye, and then secondly using tools like knitting needles or even charcoal, as mentioned by Rothenstein. Firstly, the overall height is measured against the width. This is usually done by a notable element in the subject. If, for example, it's a figure drawing, it will normally be the head, but can be any element that the user can refer back to easily. When using a comparative measuring technique with tools, it is always important to stand with your arms locked in front of you. This is because moving your arm away from you or closer to you will affect your overall measurement. The advantage of this technique is the ability to draw at any size, as long as proportionally your measurements are the same, giving the user greater flexibility and freedom to draw from different positions, like from a makeshift easel made from the back of a chair. In this example, the height of the subject will be used to find the width. As comparative measuring is fundamentally about relationships and not like-for-like distances like in sight size and gridding, any initial height can be used as the basis. Once this unit is established, the height of the subject is taken, and it can be seen that the subject here is just wider than it is taller, and so is marked off on the paper using the initial height as a guide. This gives the initial height and width of the subject. Next, smaller proportions are found, like the width of the jaw. It can be seen that the jaw fits in a little over twice within the envelope. This is then marked off correspondingly on the paper. The height of the jaw is found by measuring how many times it fits within the height. It can be seen that the jaw fits in 4 times, and so the height of the envelope can be broken down into 4 sections, thus finding the correct height. Then the initial blocking can be developed using simple lines at first to describe the whole form. Draw at Home's syllabus is designed with the home studio in mind, and as such many of the techniques mentioned become practically impossible. And that is why the focus of the teaching is firstly on training the eye before the use of tools. Learning to draw should be about continual analysis of problems and correcting mistakes, rather than attempting not to make mistakes by using at times often elaborate processes and techniques. The downside of these techniques can be that the user begins to rely on the tool first rather than their eye. This can be like paying someone to go to the gym for you and wondering why you don't get stronger. So learning to draw without tools may be harder, but it offers far bigger rewards later on, when your drawing process becomes quicker and more efficient, allowing you to get onto the fun stuff of drawing. Instead of relying on tools like the previous demonstration, often involves the need for lots of maths, which can create unneeded complexities in drawing. All initial measurements should be and can be done with your eye. After all, drawing is a visual language, and so should be a visual problem, and as such should be solved on the paper. You will see that this way of drawing is much faster and more intuitive than many others, as problems will be clear and obvious. Instead of using a tool to work out the overall height and width of the subject, it is far easier to simply place in an envelope that you think is close in proportion and stand back, asking yourself, is it too wide or too narrow? This envelope was clearly too narrow, and so it can be widened. Stepping back, it is then a case of asking yourself, is this envelope now too wide or too narrow? And it was clearly too wide. Using the first estimates, an accurate solution to the problem can be found. By not using tools, you are free to draw any size and place on the paper, unlike sight size, where the subject or paper has to be physically moved in order to change the composition. This method is all based upon relative scale and will let you quickly adapt the drawing to your needs. By having the ability to accurately place these verticals and horizontals, you will have the power to place with certainty and confidence anything in an exact position on a picture. This skill, you will find, will become invaluable in later lessons and also for your continued artistic development. So, without any more delay, let's get started.